I attended my brother's funeral, and right after my mother said, "You've never made this family proud," a man in uniform walked up to me, bowed, and whispered, "We know who you are, and your brother is still alive. I'm not the invisible daughter they thought I was. I'm the last person they should have underestimated. And my father, the man who preached loyalty, was the one who erased my brother from the face of the earth. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now to follow more gripping stories like this one." It all began the day I returned home to bury my brother and discovered that not everyone in my family belonged to the light. The first thing you should know is that I didn't cry at my brother's funeral. Not because I didn't love him. I did, in my own complicated, bruised, invisible way. But as I stood there on that gray morning, the wind cutting through my black coat like memory itself, all I could feel was emptiness. That quiet kind of hollow that seeps in when you realize you were never really in the picture. Not truly. They buried Commander Grant Kingsley with full military honors, the kind that include folded flags and speeches heavy with words like "Valor, Sacrifice, Nation." The kind of funeral where people wear medals they haven't touched in years and salutes crack the air like gunfire. And I, Mara Kingsley, stood exactly where I always had in this family, on the fringe. The photo on the altar was taken 2 years ago. Grant in uniform, sun in his eyes, smile carved like marble. There was no photo of him as a child, no photos of us together, no sign I'd existed in his life beyond a last name etched onto the same headstone. I flew back from Prague the night before. Last-minute ticket. Window seat, 2 crying babies. I didn't sleep, didn't unpack, didn't tell anyone I was coming. Just showed up in the back row of the cathedral like an uninvited guest at a movie I'd already watched too many times. My mother didn't even see me at first. She was busy weeping in the front pew delicately, the way trained women of her generation did. Perfect posture, lace gloves, a handkerchief embroidered with her maiden initials. Beside her sat my father, retired Rear Admiral Joseph Kingsley, who hadn't worn his own uniform in 15 years, but had it freshly pressed for this occasion. His spine as straight as ever, his eyes as dry as marble. I don't think he even blinked during the eulogy. The chaplain spoke of service, of honor, of Grant's devotion to country. He mentioned Lost at Sea more than once, which was poetic considering they'd never found the body. Only a scorched scrap of uniform, some wreckage, and a military watch still ticking in the silence of the Atlantic. When they called it a tragic accident, I saw something twitch in my mother's mouth. Not grief. Something closer to pride. Afterward, we gathered under a white canopy in the cemetery. The kind with polished chairs and coffee urns and silent catering staff dressed in black. Everyone murmured about the wind, about the weather, about how young Grant was. No one asked me anything. I watched as my father clasped the hand of a 4-star admiral who'd flown in from Washington, then introduced my mother to a congressional aide who praised the legacy of the Kingsley name. No one said my name. Not until I brushed past a floral arrangement and my mother turned just slightly startled. "Mara." Her voice had the same tilt of suspicion I remembered from high school when I dyed my hair dark blue and she claimed the neighbors would report us to the HOA. "I came for Grant," I said quietly. She looked me over. Not with anger, not even surprise, just that vaguely disappointed curiosity one has when a stranger shows up late to a dinner party. "You look tired," she said. "I just flew in." She touched my scarf with the tips of her fingers. "Still doing that photography thing?" "It's my work." A pause. Then softer, almost kindly, like she thought she was comforting me. "Well, at least you made it. Grant would have liked that. I just wish... I don't know. I wish you'd found something more grounded, something people could be proud of." She smiled like it was a compliment. then turned to greet a woman who used to babysit us when we were kids. I stood still for several long seconds, just breathing. This was the story of my life. Grant the legacy, the leader, the hero, and me, Mara Kingsley, the ghost with the camera. They always said I was too quiet, too withdrawn, too strange. Even as a child, I was the one who snuck out during the fireworks to watch reflections in puddles instead. I collected maps instead of dolls. I read books in languages I couldn't pronounce yet. I asked questions that made teachers pause. Grant played sports. I memorized surveillance angles. He got medals, I got therapy. They said I was odd, difficult, moody, artistic, all words that orbit the same truth disappointing. In the background, I heard a trumpet begin the opening notes of Taps. Everyone stood, so did I. The flag was folded. The gunshots echoed. The silence that followed landed sharp as glass. Then it happened. A man, maybe late 40s, with a slate-gray trench coat and hair cropped close, walked past the rows of mourners. He didn't approach the casket, didn't look at my parents. He walked straight to me. I didn't recognize him, not at first, but his eyes paused for a beat too long. A flicker of calculation, recognition, like a lens adjusting to focus. He didn't speak right away, just nodded once, slow, deliberate, and then he did something no one else had done all day. He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm but not aggressive. His voice barely above the rustle of wind through the trees. "Miss Kingsley," he said, "we know who you are." For a split second I thought he had the wrong person, that he'd mistaken me for someone else. Then I saw the insignia barely visible beneath his lapel. Not military, not civilian, something in between. Something not meant for public recognition. He leaned in closer, voice softer now. "We've been following your work. The Istanbul file, the coded light signatures in Budapest, and the drop point in Kyiv. Elegant." My breath caught. I didn't answer. Behind us, my mother was posing for a photo with an officer holding Grant's folded flag. "We'll be in touch," the man said, then nodded again. "This isn't over." He walked away like he'd never stopped. I stood there, hands still half raised, wondering if anyone else had seen. They hadn't. Not even my mother. Later at the reception, as people gathered around platters of shrimp and talked about Grant's deployment history, I slipped outside. The cold hit fast and deep. I welcomed it. I took my phone from my coat pocket, opened the encrypted photo app I hadn't touched in over a year, uploaded a single image I'd taken during the funeral. Grant's flag, the corner of the casket, and in the background a reflection in the polished wood, the man in the trench coat. I tagged it with a sequence only one person in the world would understand. Then I waited. At 2:03 a.m. a message came in. Unmarked, anonymous, but unmistakable. "Grant isn't dead, he's in holding, we need you." No name, no explanation, no context. Just the coordinates of a city I hadn't been to since the winter everything changed. Warsaw. I stared at the screen for a long time. My reflection looked back at me, dark eyes, wind-chapped lips, hair undone by the cold. All this time they thought I was just the girl with a camera. They never realized the girl with the camera had already been watching them all. I slid the phone back into my coat, stepped into the darkness, and disappeared again. This time not to run, but to finish what I started. The first vibration came just after 1:13 a.m. I was lying on top of the hotel bedspread, still in the black dress I'd worn to Grant's funeral, the stiff collar biting at my collarbone, the mascara smudge on my sleeve reminding me I'd touched my face too often in front of people who didn't know how to look at me anymore. I hadn't unpacked. I hadn't even taken off my shoes. The phone buzzed again. At first, I thought it was a weather alert, or maybe some useless flight promotion. But the screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, no contact photo, just a +48 country code. Poland. I hesitated, then I opened it. "Grant is alive. We need you. Warsaw, tomorrow night." No punctuation, no signature, no second message. I sat up. The blood rushed to my head so fast I thought the floor shifted. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen like it might change if I blinked enough. My first instinct was to delete it. My second was to laugh. But instead, I took a breath, opened a different encrypted app, a legacy program from a phone I no longer owned, and sent a ping. One phrase. "Confirm, Grant. Secure channel only." The reply came 8 minutes later. A different number, no name, no fingerprint match. DNA file compromised. 3.7% probability of ID fraud. Run silent. I stared at that phrase, run silent. I hadn't seen it in 4 years. It meant this is real. Go dark. I threw off the heels and walked to the window. The city outside was still. Winter air turned the glass to fog. Somewhere below, a delivery truck hummed past. Life still moving, even if mine had just taken a nosedive into the uncanny. I texted a burner contact in Zurich. Codename Calder. Need confirmation. June file. Ukrainian diplomat. Mariupol exit route. 2018. A delay. Then, verified. Live retrieval. 0 casualties. Language culture protocol success. You okay, Mira? Mira. That name took a second to register. It was the name they used when I wasn't Mara Kingsley. The name for missions. The name that didn't come with parents or brothers or funerals. I stared at it like it belonged to someone else. My fingers moved before I even thought through the next decision. Booking flight to Warsaw, 10 hours. I didn't tell anyone. Not the front desk, not my parents, not Grant's old commanding officer who'd left me a polite voicemail asking if I needed anything. Not my mother who texted 2 hours earlier to ask if I could bring home some of the floral arrangements after the memorial. I was done pretending to be part of their world. I packed in under 3 minutes. Camera, charger, old passport. The scarf with the embedded chip sewn beneath the lining. 3 burner phones. A single Polaroid tucked in a notebook, me and Grant, age 9 and 11, sitting on a train platform in Vermont. No one had ever seen it but me. I took the fire escape down to avoid the lobby cameras. At the airport, I paid cash. No checked bag. I wore sunglasses indoors, a soft gray beanie, and slipped past security with the practiced steps of someone who knew how not to be remembered. On the flight, I barely blinked. My body was motionless, but my mind raced at full velocity. If Grant was alive, and that was still a massive if, why reach out now? And why me? That last part I knew the answer to. Because there were only 2 people who knew what I used to do. And one of them had faked his own death. Flashback. 2019, Ukraine. The night before the city fell, I was stationed in an abandoned textile mill near Mariupol. My mission: recover intel from a compromised attaché. But the target wasn't data. It was a person. His name was Pavel Kovalenko, 47, diplomatic courier, family unknown, status exposed. The only way to get him out without blood was through something no drone could replicate. Geography. I studied city infrastructure for 2 days. Memorized the drainage lines, the open maintenance grids, the decay of sewer joints near the steel factory. But the key wasn't just maps, it was language. He didn't trust me until I spoke to him in Crimean Tatar. Not just words, but dialect. His grandmother's dialect. I had learned it in a ruined bookshop in Izmir during a storm that collapsed 3 roofs. It's amazing what people will say when they hear the voice of home coming from a stranger. Pavel came with me. No shots fired, no alarms tripped. By morning he was in Krakow, registered as an archivist. New name, new breath. No one knew how I did it. No one needed to. After that, they shelved me. Not officially, but with silence. I was too good at being invisible. And invisible assets made people nervous. They sent me back to Prague with a stipend, a consulting title, and a new assignment, nothing. But I knew why Grant kept in touch. He didn't ask about the missions. He asked about light, about exposure, about how I framed things. Mara, he said once on a call I wasn't supposed to be receiving. Your camera's a weapon, just less messy. I never asked what he meant. Now I wondered if that was the first breadcrumb. The flight landed in Warsaw under a soft gray sky. February light is different here. It drags slower, lingers just long enough to make you second-guess everything. I checked into a hostel near the river under a false name. My phone lit up the moment I locked the door. 19 Auror. Palace of Culture. 4th floor. Elevator doesn't work. No greeting, no code name, just instruction. I memorized the coordinates and threw the phone into the sink, cracked it open, and flushed the SIM. I had done this before, but it had never felt like this. This wasn't reconnaissance. This was personal. Grant. Dead, decorated, buried in a flag, but not gone. I sat down on the edge of the narrow bed and let my breathing steady. The radiator clanked to life behind me. The building hummed like a sleeping animal. And for a moment I thought of something he'd said when we were kids. We were 10 and 12, lying on the roof of the garage looking at stars. I had a flashlight. He had a slingshot. "I wish I could disappear," I said, staring up. "Why?" he asked. "So no one would expect anything of me." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "One day you'll disappear." But for the opposite reason. I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. Because when you disappear for a reason, when your absence becomes a signal, not a failure, it changes everything. Tomorrow night I'd find out if my brother was a ghost, a traitor, or the one person who saw me for what I really was all along. And if he was alive, then I wasn't going back to the shadows. Not this time. The building didn't look like much from the outside. Peeling paint, yellowed windows, a rusted sign in Polish that once advertised something about insurance but now hung at a crooked angle above the door. Just another anonymous corner of Warsaw where no one asked questions and nothing stayed in one place too long. But inside it smelled like books and secrets. The elevator predictably didn't work. I took the stairs 4 flights, each one echoing under my boots like a countdown. Lena was already waiting when I reached the landing. She looked almost exactly the same as the last time I saw her, tall, neat hair tied back in a sharp knot, eyes that didn't blink too often. She wore a camel-colored coat and held a small metal thermos in both hands like it anchored her to something human. "Mira," she said without smiling. "Lena." She stepped aside and let me into the apartment. The door locked behind me with a soft mechanical sound, 3 internal bolts, old-school analog. She never trusted digital. The space looked like a library, and a tech lab had collided in the dark. Shelves of paperbacks lined one wall, most of them in languages I couldn't read without a moment's pause. On the other, a wall of servers hummed low and steady lights blinking like distant stars. Between them sat an old photo enlarger, real film reels, and a collapsible light table covered in negatives. No greetings, no questions. Lena never wasted time. "He's alive," she said, as if we were continuing a conversation from earlier that day. "But not free." I didn't sit. I didn't speak. He made it past their firewall, Mira. Into one of the black cells embedded inside DoD system stuff not even NATO acknowledges exists. Why? He was looking for something, and apparently he found it. She moved to the table, picked up a folder, and slid it open. I recognized Grant's face before the second photo even hit the table. It was an overhead surveillance, still grainy, taken through a long-range lens, but unmistakable. Grant, no uniform, beard, gaunt, a prisoner. Where is he? Kaliningrad border, inside a facility the Russians believe is American. The Americans believe it's decommissioned. Neither is entirely correct. Who's holding him? She hesitated. Technically us. I stared at her. Not MI6? Not officially. But elements contracted intelligence run through containment channels buried in joint operations budgets, deep gray territory. Why? Because Grant broke protocol. Because he found something he wasn't supposed to find. And because someone up the chain needs him to stay erased. The room felt colder than it had 2 seconds ago. Why reach out to me? Lena turned and walked to a small safe built into the floor. She knelt, keyed in a combination, and lifted the lid. Inside was a simple black tin box. Old, beaten up, no markings. She carried it to the table like it was a heart cut from a body. He left this behind when he went in. asked that it be sent to someone named Mara Kingsley in case of his disappearance. Took me a while to realize that wasn't just his sister, it was you. I stepped forward. She opened the lid. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them, most of them mine. Prints I'd taken over the last 5 years, sunsets in Istanbul, alleyways in Baku frost, on a window in Yerevan. Photos I'd shared online, sent via email, published in travel blogs under aliases. Photos that to the world were just art. But to Grant, they were signals. My hands hovered above the prints. They were encoded, Lena said. Smart. Analog. Invisible ink overlaid with spectral light positioning. You built a frequency map into the sky gradients. I picked up the staircase in Odessa the way the shadows had hit at 3:47 p.m. on a spring afternoon. No one remembered but me. He decoded them, Lena said, and followed the trail. I found my breath again. What did he find? She hesitated. I hated when Lena hesitated. Mira, your brother was hunting something called Project Warden, a covert initiative buried inside Black Operations Logistics. It was designed to monitor dissent within military intelligence circles, but it turned into something else. A filter. A purge. A purge. Anyone deemed a threat to internal cohesion, even if they weren't traitors, whistleblowers, analysts, operatives who ask too many questions. The project logs don't show kills, they show disappearances. Grant traced 37 profiles, all scrubbed. And he knew I'd be next, she nodded once. He didn't fake his death to disappear. He did it to draw attention away from you. The words landed like a blade sliding under the ribs, silent, sharp, too fast to scream. He knew they were watching his traffic, so he made himself the target, gave you space. I reached for the stack of photographs, laid them out across the table. There in the way the clouds curved over a coastline. There in the alignment of fence posts. There in the negative space between shadows. Coordinates. A map. One photo older than the others caught my attention. A dense forest. Snow barely covering the ground. In the bottom corner, barely visible, a crumbling stone building with no roof. I remembered taking that one. It was supposed to be a throwaway shot. A transitional frame. But Grant had kept it. I flipped it over. Nothing written. But I could see the UV markers starting to fade. Lena moved beside me with a small UV flashlight. She angled it low, let the light pass across the surface. There it was. A grid, hand-drawn, numbers. Kaliningrad, I said. Just north. A kilometer from the coast. It's not on any satellite images. But the coordinates match Grant's last ping before he went dark. This is where they're keeping him, Lena nodded. That's where your trail leads. Grant embedded the signature of that location in 3 photos across 6 months. He was triangulating it without ever saying a word. And now, she looked at me. Now he needs you to finish what he started. I sat down. For the first time since the funeral, my hands shook. I'd spent years hiding signals in beauty, hiding purpose in light. I thought I was being clever, careful. I thought I was just playing my part. But Grant had seen the message in everything I didn't say, and now he needed me to hear what no one else could. Lena watched me as I sorted the photographs into sequence. I didn't need a decoder ring or a reference book. These were mine. These were memories. And underneath them was the truth. I'll go, I said. Lena didn't nod. She knew I would. But she added one thing before I stood. You realize if you do this, you won't get to come back the same. There's no cover story for what's ahead. No quiet retreat. I never expected one. She stepped away, opening a drawer. Then take this, she said, placing a device in my hand. Small, about the size of a lighter. What is it? Trigger signal. If you find him, press once. If you're compromised, press twice. And if I press 3 times, she didn't answer. She didn't need to. I left the apartment before the sun rose. The photos stayed in my coat. The weight of them was nothing, but the meaning, that could bring down everything. The building had no address. Technically, it didn't even exist anymore. Not on official maps, not on property registries. It had once been a public library decades ago before budget cuts and city politics let it rot. Now it was just a husk of broken windows and ivy-choked walls near the industrial edge of Warsaw. Forgotten. Abandoned. Perfect. The coordinates Grant encoded in the photographs led me here. Not to a base, not to a bunker, but to memory. His, mine, ours. I stepped through the side entrance just after dawn. The door creaked like something alive. Cold air curled up from the floor, like it remembered what it meant to be touched. Inside the shelves were mostly empty books, gone walls flaking with old paint and water damage. But there was still one intact desk in the northeast corner, tucked beneath a collapsed ceiling beam, a place only someone with Grant's mind and mine would consider significant. Because once years ago we played here. He was 13. I was 11. Our mother had dragged us to Warsaw on one of her diplomatic charity missions. While she talked over tea with local officials, we disappeared into this library. Grant climbed the fiction shelves like they were ladders. I took photos of peeling wallpaper of dust falling in a shaft of light. He said I was weird. I said he was boring. We met somewhere in between. Now I was here alone searching for a man who might be dead or worse alive and erased. I crouched beside the old desk fingers running along the underside of the drawer. The wood splintered easily soft with age. But tucked deep in the back, taped into the seam, was a film canister. Vintage, black metal, exactly the kind Grant used to steal from my supplies when he thought he was being subtle. I opened it. Inside a single photo and a microSD card taped to the back. The photo showed a small white building with 3 windows. Nothing remarkable. But the windows weren't lit evenly. 2 had reflections. 1 didn't. A dead spot. Dead spots mattered. I was halfway through scanning the card into my portable device when the air shifted. The kind of shift you don't hear but feel like your skin becomes a radar and every inch of you goes still. Someone was watching. I didn't turn my head. Instead, I palmed the microSD card, slid it into a hidden pocket in my jacket, and stood slowly, calm, casual the way tourists do when they realize they've wandered too far. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" said a voice behind me. Russian accent polished. Not Slavic street rough military clean. I turned. The man was young, maybe late 30s, trim beard, civilian clothes, but with the stance of someone who'd worn a uniform too long to forget how. "I'm just taking pictures," I said, holding up my camera. "The decay is interesting." He smiled, but his eyes didn't. "I know who you are, Miss Kingsley." The blood drained from my fingers. I didn't show it. "You've been expected." "What a coincidence," I replied. "So have you." He raised his hand. I didn't wait to see what came next. I ran. Through the broken stacks, ducking under beams, past shattered skylights. I heard his footsteps steady, relentless, not chasing blindly. He knew the space. He was hurting me. So I let him. Out through the side exit, into the alley, onto the street. I darted into a crowd near the tram stop, weaving between morning commuters. Tourists with cameras, locals with headphones. I slowed my pace, adjusted my coat, slung the camera forward over my shoulder like a necklace. By the time I reached the station, I was a different person. At the train terminal, I walked briskly but not urgently to a platform. Picked up a small bag I'd hidden the night before contingency protocol. Inside, a change of clothes, mirrored sunglasses, a brochure in Polish, and a press badge from a long-defunct photojournalist group. I changed in a stall, exited wearing jeans, a red windbreaker, and a face that said "student with a deadline." The station was loud, blurry with movement, security cameras but poorly placed. The man, if he'd followed me, wasn't showing himself. So I did what I'd been trained to do since the beginning. I disappeared while being watched. At a cafe kiosk, I ordered tea and snapped photos with my phone commuter's signage graffiti, a discarded shoe. But the angles were specific: left bottom light source, right lean focal depth skewed by reflection. They looked like art. They were anything but. Each photo carried a pattern. Each pattern carried a signal. Back at a bench near track 11, I uploaded 3 of them to a dormant Instagram account I hadn't touched in years. Caption: Light chases memory through broken windows. Warsaw. Had lost architecture, had travel junkie. 3 minutes later, a like appeared. Username V1NTR3. That was him. Jonas. I left the station through the service corridor, entered a hotel via the staff entrance, climbed a maintenance shaft, crossed into the adjoining building through a roof vent, and finally dropped into an unlisted co-working space 6 blocks away. He was waiting for me inside. Same black hoodie. Same laptop covered in faded stickers. Same pale skin like he hadn't seen sunlight since Edward Snowden made the news. Nice upload, he said without looking up. Very Mara in mourning. I like the grain distortion. I was followed, I replied. Russian accent, confident posture. Ah, that's new. He pulled a portable jammer from his bag, clicked it on. All signals in the room went dead. Then he looked at me. You still carry your files in analog, only the ones I want to survive. He smirked. I dropped the micro SD card on the table. He plugged it into a secure terminal, eyes scanning the data. Encrypted, triple-layered, good stuff. Can you break it? I don't need to. He pulled up a mirrored database, typed 2 words, Warden Directive. The screen changed. Redacted files, blocked IPs, a folder labeled Asset Retired. Inside Grant Kingsley. Photo, serial, last mission read containment. Status executed. Officially he's dead, Jonas said. Unofficially he's a data ghost. And the bounty? He hesitated. 5 million, he said. Anonymous fund routed through a cutout that smells a lot like Langley, but the signature's sloppy. They want him gone, but they don't want to know who does it. Internal. Highly probable. Someone within U.S. naval intelligence is pulling strings. Maybe even your dad's generation. Could be someone Grant exposed. My mouth went dry. He thought he could fix it, I said softly. Alone. He always did. Jonas leaned back. He was working on a breach angle. Something about a safe house network buried in black site infrastructure. You know anything about that? I pulled out the photo from the canister. The one with the dead spot in the window. He whistled. That's not a safe house, he said. That's a memory vault. A what? Cold storage for ghost intel. Stuff they don't want to delete but can't risk keeping online. It's like burning a book and hiding the ashes. My heart beat once, twice. Grant found one, I said. Looks like it. Jonas leaned closer. If we can get to it, we might find out who's trying to wipe him and you. Outside the city moved like nothing had happened. But inside that room I knew the game had changed. Because now it wasn't just about saving Grant. It was about exposing the people who built an entire system on stolen memories. And I was done hiding behind photographs. The phone rang at 3:12 a.m. I didn't recognize the number. But that wasn't what made me sit bolt upright in the bed. It was the ringtone. I hadn't heard it in 4 years. A custom tone, just a 4-note whistle Grant used to hum when we were kids, usually when he wanted to get my attention without Mom knowing. I'd assigned it to a contact long deleted, one that was never supposed to call again. I stared at the screen. Blocked ID, no traceable source. The signal wasn't from any of the networks I monitored. And still, I answered. There was a click, then static, heavy, and uneven like the line was being dragged through water. Then breathing. Then a voice. Mara. I froze. It was his voice. My brother's. Raw. Tired. Every syllable sounded like it had scraped through glass to reach me. Don't trust. A glitch cut through digital noise, then more static. His voice returned weaker this time. Don't trust Dad. Then silence. The line went dead. I didn't breathe for almost 10 seconds. My brain trying to reboot around the sentence I wasn't supposed to hear. Don't trust Dad. I replayed it in my head, over and over. Same words, same tremor. My father. Joseph Kingsley. Career military. Rear Admiral. Architect of discipline. Voice like a rifle shot. He was the center of our house, the spine we all bent around. He was also the man who had spent my entire childhood reminding me of what I was not. I stood slowly, my legs unsure beneath me, and walked to the small table by the window. The city outside was still, but something inside me cracked wide open. All those years, all those commands, all those quiet corrections. Flashback. Me, 11 years old, tracing the blueprints of a naval satellite system in a library book. My father walking in, pulling it from my hands. "You don't need to waste your time on things you'll never touch," he said. "Leave that to Grant." Flashback. 17 at a military-sponsored STEM camp. I built a motion-activated drone prototype. Dad saw the demo, didn't say a word. Later I overheard him on the phone. "No, she's not military material, just creative impulses. She'll grow out of it." Flashback. 23 at a Thanksgiving dinner. Grant was overseas. I brought up cybersecurity policy during a lull. Dad cut me off halfway through. "You know I love you, Mara," he said. "But that's not your world. Don't pretend to speak a language you don't live in." I always thought he was just a strict father. Out of touch, partial. I never thought he was hiding something darker. Until now. I opened the drawer of my travel bag and pulled out my field notebook. Not digital, not stored in the cloud, ink and paper. The one Grant had once gifted me with a wink for what no one's supposed to see. I turned to the back pages, started listing every encounter, every conversation with my father over the past year, every odd phrase, every name he dropped, every time he'd mentioned Grant's deployments before they were public, every silence he let hang too long. And then I saw it, a pattern. 6 months before Grant's alleged death, my father had stopped attending Navy alumni events, said he was consulting more than socializing. Around that time, Grant's messages grew erratic, coded, reserved. I flipped back to a conversation we had just after I returned from Azerbaijan. Grant had told me to mind the gaps in the mirrors. I thought it was a metaphor. Now I wondered if it was literal. Then I remembered something else. A storage unit. When I was 25, Dad had briefly rented a private off-grid storage unit in Maryland. I'd gone with him once. He told me it held family documents from his service days. But that was a lie. I knew it even then. He never brought Mom, never brought Grant, and he changed the subject every time I asked about it afterward. I picked up my phone again, opened a darknet search panel, typed in Zhuadao Project, USN, inactive files. Nothing. Then I refined the query warden level clearance, identity sanitization, internal military indexing. Still nothing. But the third variation, red containment DoD, asset retirement programs, naval intelligence unlocked a dormant protocol tag. It didn't show data, but it confirmed something chilling. My father had once held project clearance under a program nicknamed Vanishing Point. Its description was buried vague, but the classification level was high enough to suggest one thing. This wasn't just about people going dark. It was about people being erased systematically, legally, permanently. Not enemies, not traitors. Insiders. People who knew too much, asked too hard, refused to play dead. And Grant had found it. Had he told Dad? Had Dad known? I remembered their last conversation, at least the last one I'd witnessed. Grant had returned home for a weekend, his face harder than usual. He and Dad had gone into the study. The door was closed. An hour later, Grant came out silent. Dad followed 5 minutes after. He never said what they talked about. But that night I heard Grant on the phone with someone whispering, he's still part of it, still protecting it. I hadn't understood then. I did now. There was no doubt in my mind. My father had worked for or with the same architecture that now had Grant in a cage. And if Grant was trying to warn me, then maybe I was on the list too. I closed the notebook and sat on the edge of the bed. Sleep was impossible. Everything I believed about family loyalty truth, it felt like a room someone else had been rearranging while I was sleeping. My father, the man who told me to be smaller, who taught me to obey, who said that secrets were the price of service. He hadn't just built walls. He'd made sure no one else saw what was behind them. I remembered something Grant once told me when we were still speaking in open channels. There are two kinds of ghosts, Mara. The ones who haunt and the ones who keep others from being haunted. I think I know now which one he became, and which one my father chose to be. At 4:02 a.m. I packed a small go bag, changed SIMs, burned the one that received the call. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. Not the photographer, not the sister, not the girl my family had tried to box into silence. Just a woman with enough truth to bring a house of shadows crashing down. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. He didn't hear me come in. That wasn't surprising. He was standing in the backyard, still in the posture I remembered from childhood. Hands clasped behind his back, chin slightly lifted, spine straight, as if gravity itself saluted him. The twilight cast his figure in silver shadow, clean lines against the trimmed grass. From behind, he looked like a statue, untouched by time, untouched by consequence. I hadn't been home in nearly 3 years, not since I stopped pretending to be a disappointment and started being something far more dangerous, useful. The kitchen light was on. Mom must have left it before heading to her book club or wherever she went these days to avoid the thick air her husband created just by existing in a room. I crossed the floor slowly, like I was walking into a memory I didn't belong in anymore. The sliding door creaked as I opened it. He didn't turn. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said. Calm, like we were meeting for coffee. I stepped into the yard. The grass was cold through my boots. "I didn't come for pleasantries," I said. He finally turned just enough to let the porch light paint half his face. He looked older, yes, but not weaker. His jaw still held the judgment of command. The eyes, sharp as razors, watched me like I might detonate. "No," he said. "You never did." We stood like that for several seconds, 2 lines of the same blood facing off on different ends of a secret war. "I spoke to Grant," I said. His mouth twitched, a pause. "No, you didn't." I took a step forward. His voice was cracked, tired, but his words were clear. He said, "Don't trust Dad." Silence. Then finally he exhaled. Not a sigh, not regret, just pressure leaving a sealed vessel. "Grant should have been dead 2 years ago," he said. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I believed he meant it with malice, but because I knew he meant it with conviction. He walked toward the patio table and sat down with deliberate calm, gestured for me to do the same. I didn't move. "He was warned," he said. He didn't listen. "You mean he found something he wasn't supposed to see?" "I mean," he said sharply, he crossed a line. "You have no idea what you're stepping into, Mara." "Then explain it." He stared at me. I didn't flinch. "You remember when you were 16, he said, and tried to build that encrypted transmitter in your closet?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "You broke it, said I wasn't allowed near military-grade signal equipment." "You weren't," he said. "Not just because it was illegal, but because you didn't understand the context. You were playing with a live wire." "And Grant?" I asked. He understood the wire. He didn't answer right away. His eyes wandered to the trees beyond the yard where night was beginning to thicken. "Grant found things," he said finally. "He had clearance just enough to get curious, not enough to be safe." "You knew." He didn't deny it. "You were part of Vanishing Point," I said. This time he looked at me, and for a moment, just a sliver, I saw the wall crack. Not regret, but recognition. The look of a man who knew he could no longer pretend. "I oversaw asset protection protocols for high-risk scenarios," he said. "That's a long way of saying you made people disappear." "No," he snapped. "I made threats go away. There's a difference." "No, Dad," I said. "There isn't. Not when the threats were your own son, your own family." His jaw flexed. His voice dropped to that quiet, lethal tone I remembered from every scolding I'd received as a child. "You don't understand the stakes, Mara. Grant endangered everything. He exposed structures not meant to be seen. And when I tried to shield him, when I gave him the chance to walk away quietly, he kept digging." "You could have protected him," I said. "You could have pulled him out." "I did," he shouted, suddenly standing. "I faked his death. I had files erased. Do you think the Navy just loses track of one of its own commanders? I spent every favor, every ounce of leverage I had keeping him alive. I stared. You called that protection? He stepped forward now, voice low again. I called it the only option. We were inches apart. You're defending a system that eats its own, I said. You trained us to believe in integrity, in service, and honor. And then you buried your son under lies because he lived by those values more than you ever did. His face changed then, not softened, but hardened, like something had calcified behind the eyes. You think this is about right and wrong, he said. This is about order, stability. The country survives because people like me make impossible choices, so idealists like you can sleep at night. I don't sleep, I said. Not since Prague, not since Mariupol, and definitely not since I found the box Grant left behind. His breath caught. I saw it. You knew he'd pass something to me, I continued. Because he knew I was the only one who'd understand what it meant. You're not equipped for this. Then why are you afraid? That stopped him. I watched something subtle unravel in his shoulders. I buried him, he said. Emotionally, logistically. And you know what, Mara? It worked. For 2 years I slept. I told myself it was done, that he was gone. And then you came back, with your notebooks, your questions, your fucking camera. I didn't speak. He stepped back, straightened his posture. If you're going to chase ghosts, he said, at least understand what happens to people who catch them. I looked at the man who had raised me, who taught me how to keep my spine straight under fire, who told me silence was strength. And in that moment, I realized something vital. He had been preparing me for this confrontation my entire life. He just didn't know I'd be standing on the other side of it. I'm not Grant, I said quietly. No, he replied. You're worse. He turned to go. Are you going to report me? I asked. He paused. If you want to follow his path, he said without looking back, then prepare to disappear. He left me standing in the cold, but I didn't shiver. For the first time, I didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's legacy. I felt like fire, the kind that doesn't burn for warmth, the kind that brings down entire systems. The plane landed in Toronto under a heavy gray sky, the kind of sky that looked like it had something to confess. I didn't wait for luggage, didn't book a hotel. I had only one address memorized, an abandoned textile building in the East End, buried beneath layers of fake zoning records and quiet city council signatures. No sign, no doorbell, just an unmarked freight elevator that required a 2-step knock and a 7-second delay before the doors even hissed. Lena answered. She didn't say hello. She never did. Just stepped aside, letting me pass into a space colder than memory and quieter than grief. Jonas was already there, glasses fogged, fingers dancing over 3 overlapping monitors, each screen blurred with moving code and broken encryption fragments. His eyes flicked up as I walked in. Mara, he said. You look like you just walked through someone else's funeral. I did, I replied. He raised an eyebrow, said nothing more. The place was bigger than I remembered. Concrete walls, floor-length servers stacked like soldiers along the perimeter. But it wasn't just tech. There were metal drawers along the far side of the room, old fireproof, unmarked, each one containing folders that didn't officially exist. This was where the erased were stored. Not bodies, just lives, clean names. Blank histories forgotten by design, by... Lena walked to a drawer and opened it slowly. Grant's file, I asked. She nodded. What's left of it? Inside a single folder, labeled in pen, not type. His name crossed through with red ink. Underneath replaced, A-Youth Vector S. Who's Vector S, I asked. Alias. Used by 2 separate contracting officers in the Department of Naval Systems, and 1 ghost node run out of Bucharest. Hard to say. Guess we'll ask him when we find him, I said. Lena pulled out a secondary document, a photo printed on thick matte paper. At first, it looked like noise-blurry footage from a heat camera or aerial drone. But when she adjusted the saturation on a nearby screen and overlaid the image with a grid, the lines came into focus. A compound, hidden in a mountain fold, coastal. Black Sea, she said, somewhere near Georgia. Jonas leaned over. The architecture, these aren't Russian builds. That's American. It's not a base, Lena corrected. It's a shell. A hybrid facility. Private money, government muscle, no official flags. A prison, I asked. Worse, Jonas said. A market. My throat tightened. They're trafficking, I said. Tech. People. Secrets. Anything with a shadow price. They use soldiers on paper uniforms with rank, but none of them are active duty. It's all borrowed credibility. That's why Grant went dark. He found a crack between two systems, fell through it. Or was pushed, Lena added. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. And you're sure he's there? Lena didn't answer. Instead, she walked over to another workstation, opened a file I hadn't seen before. It was an image taken from above night vision. The corner of a roof, a body being moved under tarp. The resolution was poor, but the timestamp matched the last known transmission from Grant's emergency beacon. Next, she pulled up a second file. A photo, one of mine, taken 2 years earlier in Istanbul. A waterfront alley cast in twilight with two boats passing behind a tangle of wires. It had gone viral at the time, tagged as urban stillness. I'd uploaded it with a poetic caption and watched it get shared by art blogs, reposted by strangers. But it wasn't art, not really. Look here, Lena said. She zoomed into the far background where the shape of the boat's bow cut through the current. She adjusted the light balance, sharpened the pixels. Then we saw it. In the reflection on the water, barely visible, was a structure. And in the angle of the wake, coordinates. You embedded this, she said. You didn't even realize it. I stared. The numbers were unmistakable now. It was the same location. I took this during the Galata mission, I whispered. I was documenting a drop zone, but the light shift, it wasn't planned. Grant must have seen it, Jonas said. Picked up the signal. That's how he found the site. And now we follow it, I said. Lena sat, folded her arms. This isn't sanctioned. It's not even recoverable. Do you think I care? I think, she said slowly, that this isn't a rescue anymore. It's a war between two people no one trained properly, him and you. And it's personal. I nodded. Good, I said. That means we'll fight harder. Jonas turned the screen toward us again. There's no satellite coverage inside the canyon, he said. They're jamming inbound signals. We'll have to go low-tech manual entry drone recon shortwave comms. What's the window? 3 days, Lena answered. Before the site shifts location again. They move every quarter to avoid trace stacking. And after that, they go dark for 6 months. I didn't hesitate. Then we go now. Lena paused, then nodded. Not government, not agency, not sanctioned, she said. Not family anymore either, I replied. She raised an eyebrow. Wrong, I said. This is family, the real kind. She cracked the faintest smile. Jonas opened a new file. Pulled up transport routes, flight logistics, entry visas. He was already in motion. It was like the old days, only now no mission tags, no backup. Just 3 ghosts going after one of their own. I pulled my camera from the bag, slid in a fresh roll of film. Lena saw it and laughed softly. You're still bringing that? It's how I see, I said. It's how Grant sees me. Jonas didn't look up. He's counting on you, he said. More than you realize. I knew that. That's why we were going. Because no one else would. Because this wasn't about orders anymore. This was about the ones caught in between. The ones the system used and discarded. The ones who refused to stay erased. And it started now. It was midnight when we reached the edge of the gorge. Fog rolled low along the coast like it was breathing, thin, hungry, waiting. The mountains above Kaliningrad weren't marked on any official map. But I knew the topography like I knew my own heartbeat. The photo I had taken in Istanbul had given me more than coordinates. It had taught me the rhythm of the terrain, the slant of light, the wind vectors, the echo patterns, all of it. Jonas had stripped down the tech, no trackers, no digital trail, just analog compasses, grease pencil maps and instinct. Lena moved behind us like a shadow calibrated and unshakable. The entrance to the complex wasn't a gate. It was a runoff tunnel carved into rock 6 feet wide and buried beneath a mass of twisted ivy and broken floodstones. You'd miss it if you didn't know to crouch, didn't know to shine your light at just the right angle to catch the green flecks of algae shimmering against the inside arch algae that grew only when exposed to the artificial chemical drips used by subterranean filtration systems. We went in one by one. No words. The air inside the tunnel was thick and wet like breathing through an old sponge soaked in motor oil. Lena checked her watch. 17 minutes until next patrol cycle. We move now. Jonas nodded. He handed me the camera my old Leica rewired to trigger an analog EMP burst at close range. I never thought a piece of gear used to frame stolen glances on cobblestone streets would become the one thing between life and death. We moved low, sticking to corners, following the sound of turbine hums overhead. The further we went, the colder it got. I mapped every turn with my mind like I'd done hundreds of times in cities I wasn't supposed to be, in capturing images no one would ever see. But this wasn't just about the shot anymore. This was about getting Grant back. The first sign we were close came from the smell iodine rubber blood. The cell block was recessed into stone, lit by blue LEDs that cast the walls in permanent night. A single guard stood outside the third door on the left, pacing bored. His rifle was slung too loose. I lifted the camera. One click! Flash EMP pulse. The lights cut. So did his radio. He barely had time to turn before Jonas reached him quiet final. We moved to the door. No time for finesse. Jonas wired the lock, rerouted the magnetic seals. There was a click. Then the air changed. Inside it was darker still. And there he was, Grant, on the floor. Curled inward skin, pale lips, cracked hair matted to his forehead. But alive. Mara, he whispered. I dropped beside him. Don't move, I said. But he shook his head, barely lifting it. You came, he rasped. I told them you'd come. He reached out and touched the edge of the camera still hanging from my shoulder. Everything you need, he said. It's all in the photos. The files? I couldn't trust anyone else. Behind me, Lena scanned the room. 2 more minutes. We have got to move, she said. I tried to lift him. He winced, but forced himself upright. Every step was pain, but he didn't complain. In that moment, I saw it. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He wasn't the heroic brother with medals and ceremonies and family praise. He was just a man who had learned the cost of knowing too much. And I was just the shadow that had refused to leave him behind. We moved fast. Through another tunnel, up the maintenance shaft. Jonas went ahead, disabling the fallback alarms. We hit the emergency exit, a false panel beneath an unused generator bay. Freedom was 20 feet away. But the guards found us first. Shouts. Flashlights. The bark of commands in languages that had no allegiance. Jonas didn't hesitate. He turned to us and said, take him, go. No, I said. But he had already moved, pulling the emergency fuse, creating a wall of sparks and smoke behind us. I heard the gunfire before I heard him fall. Lena dragged me forward. We ran. Through the dark, through the forest until the noise faded and the wind returned, and I could feel my lungs burn with something close to grief. When we reached the extraction point, the safe van was already waiting. Lena pulled open the door and helped Grant inside. I followed, but before climbing in, I turned around. The forest behind us was still. No sound. No Jonas. I reached down and unhooked the Leica from my neck. Opened the back panel. Inside, hidden beneath the film spool, was a data chip. Tiny. But it weighed everything. Encrypted files. Names, accounts, audio recordings, movements of black funds and off-books facilities, the exact network that had imprisoned Grant and the names of those who had enabled it, including one I had suspected all along, my father. I closed the panel and clutched the camera to my chest. This wasn't just a tool anymore. It was proof, and maybe just maybe justice. Inside the van, Grant rested against the window, his breath fogging the glass. He looked over at me. his face bruised but eyes steady. "You know how to end this," he said softly. "I do," I whispered. He closed his eyes. And for the first time since I was a child, I saw my brother not as a star, not as an unreachable figure lit by medals and parades, but as a man who had once trusted me without question. As the engine roared to life and the van peeled away into the night, I knew what had to come next. The fight wasn't over, but we were no longer alone, and I wasn't hiding anymore. This war had taken so much. But tonight, it gave me one thing back: a beginning. It started with a photograph of an empty field in southern Spain. Golden light, wild barley swaying. A tree in the distance, its branches twisted like broken fingers. To anyone else, it was nothing more than aesthetic, a quiet capture of nature at rest. But beneath the warmth of its colors were data packets, invisible markers only Mara's system knew how to read. The first image went up at 9:14 a.m. on a burner account. Then another from a different account 10 minutes later. A photo of a coastline in Iceland, then an abandoned train station in Turkey, then an overexposed mountain pass near Belarus. Dozens more followed, all uploaded with soft, poetic captions meant to blend in. By noon, 100 images had been shared. By 1:00 p.m., over 300 servers in 21 countries had decoded them. And by sunset, the network was on fire. This wasn't a leak, it was an orchestration. A storm disguised as art. A reckoning made of pixels and silence. The encryption buried in each image unraveled the web of names, codes, offshore accounts, shell corporations, and encrypted audio recordings that Mara and Jonas had recovered from the camera before his final breath. At the center of it all stood a list. 23 names: generals, commanders, analysts, politicians, men and women whose faces were stamped on medals and who had sworn oaths under flags, among them her father. The same man who once locked up her Polaroid camera because it was distracting her from real work. The Pentagon tried to contain it, but it was too late. Foreign agencies had mirrored the data, journalists had published timelines. A dead drop site in Berlin exploded with traffic. And through it all, the name Mara Kingsley was nowhere to be seen. She had released truth into the world like a breath and then disappeared back into shadow. Until the subpoenas came. Until the headlines read, "Hero's father accused of treason." Until she had to look into the eyes of the man who once said she should try being more like her brother. The courtroom wasn't grand. No flags, no gallery, just a long oak table, cold lights, and the sound of breathing. Mara stood behind the glass partition wearing gray, silent. Her father was let in, older than she remembered. His back hunched slightly, his hands trembling. The moment he saw her, his eyes didn't flare in anger. They didn't narrow in hate. They dropped, almost like he had expected this, like he had always known the scales would balance one day. The judge read the charges in a voice clipped and metallic. Espionage, obstruction, complicity in covert rendition programs, participation in the erasure of over a dozen whistleblowers, including Grant. Each word felt like a stone in water rippling through every memory Mara had tried to bury. When they asked if he had anything to say, he looked up slowly. His eyes found hers. For a moment, it was just the two of them. No walls, no uniforms, just father and daughter and the silence between them. "I tried to protect what I believed in," he said. His voice didn't shake. "But I forgot to protect what mattered most." He turned to the judge. "I won't contest the charges." Gasps echoed. The gavel came down hard. But it wasn't the verdict that left Mara breathless. It was what came next. As her father stood to be escorted out, he paused near the edge of the room. Just long enough for the guard to hesitate. Just long enough to speak across the room without needing volume. "If you wanted to be the shadow Mara," he said, not with anger, but with something close to reverence, "then you've proven one thing." He looked at her. "It's in the darkness we see the truth." Then he walked away. The steel door closed behind him, and Mara stood still. No victory, no applause, just the weight of truth pressing against her spine. Later that night, she sat on the steps of the courthouse, the cold air cutting through her coat. Her phone buzzed once. A single message from an encrypted line, "It's done, they're falling." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Above her, the stars shimmered against the black canvas of the sky, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a shadow. She felt like the lens through which the world was finally seeing clearly. Snow. Just snow. Thick, powder-soft snow falling in sheets outside a small wood-framed cabin tucked deep in the Carpathian Mountains. There were no footprints leading to the door, no signs of visitors. Just the whisper of wind curling between the eaves and the low hum of a generator somewhere behind the slope. Inside the room smelled faintly of coffee pine and the slow burn of old photographs. A fire hissed in a stone hearth, and at a worn wooden table sat a woman, shoulders cloaked in a gray shawl, fingers curled around a ceramic mug. Her name was Mara Kingsley, only no one called her that anymore. The government had erased her. Name, passport, academic records, border logs, voting history, social security, gone, as if she had never existed. But there was no regret in her face. No ache. Only the stillness of someone who had traded recognition for peace noise for silence. This was the price, and she had paid it in full. Her new name didn't matter. The village she lived in barely had 100 people. They knew her as the lady with the camera who took long walks before dawn and sold prints to tourists in the summer. None asked where she came from, and she never offered. In a drawer under the floorboards, buried beneath layers of canvas, were 3 passports, a burner phone, and a flash drive containing the only copies of Jonas's final data stream. She hadn't touched them in months. Maybe she never would again. But she kept them, just in case. Some nights she'd still hear Grant's voice, that rasp fractured from days of torture whispering, "You know how to end this." Some nights she'd see her father's face, lined proud and heavy with shame, telling her, "It's in the darkness we see the truth." She missed them, not the people necessarily, but the roles they played in the storm of her life. Grant had been declared posthumously alive, an ironic label concocted by a military tribunal that didn't want to admit a mistake. His rank was restored. His medal ceremony was held without him. A framed photo stood at the Capitol, surrounded by people who never knew the real man. And then he vanished. No records, no sightings, no requests for reunion. It was how Mara knew he had found his peace. Or at least his own version of it. He had become a ghost that served peace in silence, like her. Only once 5 weeks after the final trial, a postcard had arrived in her mailbox. No return address, no signature, just an image. A close-up shot of 2 sandhill cranes flying over a lake at sunrise. And scrawled beneath in handwriting she knew by heart, "You always did see better in the dark." She didn't cry. She just placed the postcard inside a wooden box on the mantel, next to another photo older cracked around the edges. 2 children. A boy in a toy naval uniform, a girl holding a disposable camera too big for her tiny hands. They were laughing. Back when things were simple. Back when the world was small enough to fit in the frame of a Polaroid. Outside, the storm eased. Clouds drifted. Sunlight spilled over the mountains in long golden stripes. Mara stood, pulled on her boots, and slung her camera bag over her shoulder. She stepped outside the door, closing behind her with a soft click. Each step crunched in the snow as she walked down the trail behind the cabin, the same trail she walked every morning since the day she arrived. This was her ritual, her rhythm, the only structure in a life rebuilt from the ruins of secrecy. At the edge of the hill stood a wooden post wrapped in vines. Nailed to it was a corkboard weathered by snow and sun. Locals called it the memory wall. People pinned notes, photos, messages for the lost or the loved. Mara reached into her coat, pulled out a small photograph freshly printed, tacked it gently onto the board. It was a picture of her, not the present version, but one taken weeks ago. She stood in front of the courthouse steps the same day her father was sentenced. Her shoulders square, her face unreadable. In her hand, the old camera that started it all. Next to her in the background, barely visible, Grant, looking not at the building, not at the press, but at her. It was the last time they'd been captured together. She hadn't taken the photo, but someone had. She pinned it beneath an older photo already on the board. One from childhood, the same one she kept on the mantle. 2 kids, a laugh, a beginning. She stepped back, looked at them both, then slowly raised her camera, framed the moment. Click. Because that's what she did. She didn't write history. She didn't testify. She didn't hold power. She captured moments, small ones, forgotten ones, ones that history books never wrote down, because someone had to. And if freedom had a price, this was it. To live in silence, to love from afar, to be the one who sees clearly in the dark and never asks for light. As she turned back toward the cabin, snow began to fall again, soft like memory. And Mara Kingsley, who no longer carried that name, walked into the white vanishing like the shadow she had always been. Lisbon, 6 months later. No headlines, no names, just a gallery tucked between a flower shop and a locksmith. The kind of place tourists pass by without stopping. But inside, the light was soft, intimate. Walls bathed in gentle gray frames floating like memories held aloft. It was an anonymous exhibit. No artist statement, no biography, no opening speech. Just a title printed in tiny letters beneath each image, for the unseen. One photo more than the others pulled people in. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was bold. It was quiet. A landscape blanketed in untouched snow, the trees skeletal and pale against the sky. In the center, a single trail of footprints leading away from the frame toward something unseen. The gallery whispered. Some wondered what it meant. Others felt it but couldn't explain. But one woman stood in front of the photograph for a long time, still, eyes wet. Her scarf was tightly wound, and she held her hands in front of her like a prayer she hadn't said yet. Gray streaks lined her dark hair. Her breath quivered as she read the caption again and again. It didn't say a name, but she knew. Because she was the only one in the room who had tucked a little girl into bed beside a flashlight and a stack of old National Geographics. She was the only one who had ever told that girl, "You'll never make anything of yourself if you keep hiding." And now here she was seeing what that hiding had become. Seeing that her daughter had become more than she'd ever dared to believe. She cried. Quietly. The kind of cry that doesn't need sound to be heard. Across the city on a hilltop cloaked in mist, someone was watching the ocean. Mara Kingsley. No longer a name in the system. No longer a daughter of a hero. Just a woman in her 30s standing barefoot on cool stone holding a camera with fingerprints worn into the grip. She'd taken that snowy photo the day she buried the last drive. She didn't attend the trial. She didn't want to see the final crumble of a name she'd once tried so hard to live up to. She let the machine clean up after itself. Her part was done. What she wanted now wasn't justice or applause. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was stillness. It was that exact moment between the breath in and the breath out where everything feels suspended. It was the knowing that peace isn't something you earn. It's something you build from nothing. She kept her head low. No IDs. No real name. She taught photography classes to kids in the village. Walked alone every morning. Let the world forget her. But there was always that one image. The snowy forest. The footprints. She didn't take that photo for the world. She took it for herself. A reminder that the way forward doesn't always mean walking toward light. Sometimes it means knowing where the shadows are and walking right into them anyway. Jonas was gone. Lena had gone back to her station. She sent postcards without names. Always from new countries. Always with pictures of bridges. And Grant, well, that part wasn't hers to tell. But sometimes late at night when the wind hit the cliffs a certain way, she could almost hear him say, "You were always better at this than me." Her camera beeped. Low battery. She turned and walked back into the house where the walls were lined with printed photos. None of them were labeled, but each one was a story, a scar, a whisper, a memory without need for proof. She hung up her coat, sat down by the window, and pulled out one last photo, wrinkled at the corners, faded. 2 children standing beside a broken tricycle. A boy in uniform, just plastic back then, and a girl squinting into the sun. Hair in knots, holding a cardboard camera she'd made herself. They were smiling, not for anyone else, just for each other. She pinned it to the wall beside the newest photo, then turned back to the window and smiled. Voiceover. I used to be a shadow no one cared to look at. Now I choose the shadows, because in the darkness you see the truths that light blinds you from. And for the first time, they're the ones watching me. Fade to black. Then silence. Then click. The sound of a shutter. The last image. The girl behind the camera walking away. And the world finally catching up to her.